Good evening, everyone. This is loud. I guess it's better now. Not too loud. So, here we are once again for our regular meeting in English. So welcome everyone. And as we usually do, we do the initial prayer, and then we have the reading of a message, and then brief comment, and right after that, the main topic of the night, which will be on Chapter 3 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. There are many dwellings in the universe, as Jesus taught us. But before that, let's do our initial prayer, and then we will go to our reading and to our conversations. So if you want, you can close your eyes and focus a little bit more on the words, on the feelings, opening up our minds and our hearts so that we can feel even more the presence of the good spirits around us, trying to envelop us with their love, to infill us with their hope, so that we can, by learning a little bit more about Jesus' message, about his love for all of us, about the way, the truth, so that we can transform our lives for better by learning how to serve, by learning how to love, learning even more how to get out of ourselves, to meet the others who are our friends, who are our brothers and sisters, because we are all creatures, sons and daughters of the Holy Creator, God. God, may your love fall upon us, not only tonight, but always. So be it. So as I said, we are going to read and make a comment on a message number 84 from the book Our Daily Bread. And I like this version that I have, the electronic version of the translation, and I don't have it in print, so that's why I keep reading from my cell phone. Hopefully one day I can buy it from a place. So this is, like I said, from the book Our Daily Bread, message number 84. And Paul says in his first letter to Timothy, chapter 2, verse number 8, he says, "Therefore I want men to pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without anger or contention." I want men to pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without anger or contention. And then Emmanuel, I forgot to tell about the book. The book is written by the Spirit Emmanuel through the psychography of Chico Xavier. And Emmanuel makes the following comment. He says, "In this passage from Paul's first epistle to Timothy, we receive a precious recommendation for service. Some disciples will see in the text only an exhortation to a posture of praise. However, the Damascus convert explains that we should lift up holy hands everywhere without anger or contention. Paul is not referring to the act of folding hands in prayer, which some people prefer to do in certain religious circles, where, due to the respectful artificiality of the situation, visible irritability or arguments are uncalled for. Rather, the apostle is referring both to the honest and uplifting actions of individuals who cooperate with divine providence and to the daily work in the most obscure regions of the world. In reading Paul's advice, we must remember that people, in their individual efforts, invariably lift their hands in their daily work. If they administrate, they point out ways to do things. If they participate in intellectual work, they use a pen. If they work in the field, they steer the farm implement. Paul adds, however, that such hands ought to be holy, meaning that even though many people lift their arms in their earthly work, it is important to discern its purpose and content. If you wish to apply this reasoning to yourself, determine first of all else if your action is proceeding free of destructive anger and needless demands. Chapter 84. So, Paul says, and of course he cites or he talks about prayer. Therefore, he says, and I'm going to say it again, I want men to pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without anger or contention. So Paul is saying, I want everybody to pray in every situation of their lives. That's what he's saying. And he says, how do I want you to pray? I want you to pray doing, or one of the things, lifting up holy hands without anger or contention. And what Emmanuel comes to tell us is that with this comes a large reflection, because we should really ask ourselves, what is to pray? And maybe that's the whole point of the story that Emmanuel wants to try us to understand. Is it to pray just to sit down or kneel down or close our eyes and say some words? That's not what it is, because maybe I don't even know how to say beautiful words. And how many times have we said, oh, that prayer of that child, a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, is so much beautiful and so much powerful than a prayer of a person who is, 80 years old, that knows all the words, that knows a lot of beautiful words and a lot of beautiful thoughts. But then the person prays, and you feel nothing. And I feel nothing. So when Paul says that we should pray everywhere, first, he's not saying for us to stop doing what we're doing, and for everything that we're going to do, we should say a prayer. But maybe that we should transform everything that we're doing into a prayer. And how do we transform things into a prayer? Maybe that's what he says next. Lifting up holy hands. Not just lifting hands. Everybody lifts their hands. Like as he says here, if I am an intellectual worker, I will grab a pen and do stuff with my pen. Well, Emmanuel here at that time didn't have computers, right? So he was not thinking about, right, doing stuff with a mouse or the keyboard, but that's what he wants to say, right? Imagine Nancy, right, working only with pens without computers to make all these things that she needs to do, right, with collecting data from a lot of people. How much time and how longer would it take to write everything on a paper, and right? and go back. And Adriana, the same thing. And he says, well, people who work at the farm, for example, right? They will need to move their trucks, will need to tend to their soil, take care of their cows, they will lift hands, they will have to use their hands. And uh, of course, and sometimes I tend to over-explain things, but it's that sometimes we're talking to people and people say, oh, but what about people who don't have hands? Well, he's not talking about physical hands only. He's talking about acting. He's talking about doing things, right? Of course, we don't need to raise hands to do. If I don't have any hands, but I have something that I can use to do my work, whatever it is. There are how many painters have no hands, right? And then we even have campaigns of people that buy postcards from people who paint with their feet, for example. So it's not about hands. Otherwise, Paul will be completely wrong. How could we pray if we didn't have hands, right? If we cannot raise holy hands, if we don't have hands, so God will not accept me. So that's the main idea of what Emmanuel and Paul are trying to say here, right? It's not about the hands or the physical hands or the movement of praying and, I have to pray with my hands like this or with my hands like this, or sitting down or standing up or kneeling down. No, of course, we can show respect to some people doing what they believe it is. So if we're going to a church, if we're going to a mosque, right? If we're going to visit a friend that doesn't like us to get inside their house with our shoes, for example, we should respect that person if he doesn't like, right? Even if we can argument, right? We can argue and say, hey, look, I can take my shoes off and I don't mind, but I think you will mind, the smell that will come up from my feet. So it's your choice, right? But at least, right, I'm trying to respect the other person, right? But what Emmanuel and Paul want us to understand here is, look, if you're doing your job, whatever it is, you can pray while you. It is not by saying words of praise to anybody and closing your eyes. No, you can lift up your holy hands by doing your job the best way that you can do your job. By really putting your heart, your love, not only for the job, but for your family who will take part of that money to use, to your boss that is giving you the job that you have at that moment. And this is to really be there and to be praying with our hands, holy hands up, right? Using our hands, using our efforts, our minds, everything that we have, holy, right? With sanctity, being remembering the words that Jesus taught us about loving ourselves and loving the others and love God above everything. If we have a job to do, we should do the best that we can. So lift up holy hands, which is, again, the title, lifting up holy hands, which is the title of the message, is not about the physical hands. It's not about prayer or a prayer that I have in my head ready, and I'll be repeating those words. No problem with repeating the words, but what is the feeling? What is the sentiment that I'm putting on those words? What is really coming out of myself at that moment? Right? I'm saying a prayer here, and all of a sudden the person does something, and right in the middle of the prayer, right after the prayer, then I curse the person, I go and hit the person. What is this prayer working for? What is it doing to me? And so we should, as Emmanuel says at the very end, and this is really interesting because I would say that this is very uncommon from Emmanuel, because he doesn't usually put it this way, but I like the way that he puts this here. He says, if you wish. Here's what I have to say, right? Paul said this, I'm explaining what Paul said, and he comes and looks at us and says, so, look, if you wish to do this that I'm saying and that Paul invited us to do, if you wish to apply this reasoning to yourself, determine first of all else before anything and everything, be determined. Try to understand if from you, your action is proceeding free of destructive anger and needless demands. Because when Paul says, right, so that we can finish, when we lift our hands to do our prayer, we have to do so without anger and without fighting against our brothers and sisters. Or complaining. Because when it is also, right, one of the messages from Jesus. So if you are going to the temple to get your money and put there to do something, but if you have something against your brother, before doing that, go talk to your brother, make peace with your brother so that you can go to the temple. What is Jesus saying? Jesus is saying, okay, look, if you think that your money is saving you, look, there's something wrong. There is something that you didn't understand yet. And Emmanuel is mimicking this with Paul saying the same thing here. So lift up your holy hands. Oh, I'm lifting up my holy hands and praying and doing my stuff. And while in the middle of the prayer, oh, Jesus, get rid of that person, that awful friend of mine. I put him into hell. What? Right? And so if you're doing this, determine from yourself if you are really doing this without anger, without complaining, without this contention, this fight against the other person. And that's basically what the message wants to convey to us. And maybe we will learn to lift our holy hands more often than not. And so we will go on and move over to the beginning of chapter 3. But before I do so, I'm going to change something right there in the computer, and I'll be right back. You're not going to get rid of me that easy. And I'm back. So tonight we're going to start chapter 3. And as I usually say, and I think maybe one day I'll stop repeating this, but maybe not, I don't know. What we're doing here is going chapter by chapter, reading, and not actually reading, but studying and making comments on passages from the Gospel according to Spiritism. Naturally, this is one of the covers. There are so many other covers, different translations. The book was naturally written in French, and of course in French there's only one version because it was written in French. There's no much reason or need to be translating French, Old French to New French, although I'd say that some people would prefer to have newer words, even in, right? And we have that in so many languages, in so many. If a book was written like 150 or 200, 300 years ago, of course, vocabulary changes, some grammar changes. So, but the idea is in English and of course in Portuguese or in any other languages, there are different versions and different translations of the book. This is one of them. It's to me, it's one of the best ones. One of the ones that I like to read the most. But even in my cell phone, which I also have the ebook version of the Gospel According to Spiritism, which, by the way, is from the same editor, which is the International Spiritist Council. This version and the electronic version have their own differences. So it is interesting that they have different translations, maybe more modern ones from different translators, and but nothing that really affects the main ideas behind the words. So, and as I was saying, we're going chapter by chapter, item by item. In the Gospel According to Spiritism, divided in 28 chapters. We already had lectures about every chapter of this book, but as a whole. We talked about chapter 1, then next month we will talk about chapter 2, and then month after that, chapter 3, and so on and so forth. So we already covered the whole book. Once we finished, we decided to go back. Instead of now talking about chapter by chapter, we would go and study the items of each chapter. And sometimes there are 3 items in one lecture, sometimes 4 items, sometimes 10 items, depending on how the topic is collected and connected. So tonight we're studying chapter 3, which, so that you can have an idea of the difference of the translations. I'm just going to do this for the title of the chapter, which is, in this book here, in this version, they say, "In my Father's house are many mansions." This is the title of the chapter in this book. In this version here, which is by the same editor, but a different version, different translation, they say, "There are many dwellings in my Father's house." So they changed the order of the words, they changed one of the words, right? Dwellings and mansions, which is basically the same thing, or the idea is the same. Here they use the word mansions as if it's a big house, right? Usually that's what a mansion means. A dwelling is any place that I can live on or can go and live inside. It can be a shack, a very modest house. It can be a house, can be an apartment, can be. So maybe that's why they chose dwellings for this, because what we usually hear in Portuguese, I'm not sure about the word that Jesus used, right, in his language. But the idea is that we, anywhere, right, can be our house. That's what Jesus is trying to convey to us. And that's basically what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, although we are not talking, and this is a very small piece in this chapter, so I'm going to do more or less what I did for the message. I'm going to read the 3 paragraphs, and as I'm reading, we're going to try to explain and go into a little more detail about what Kardec says here, and what based on what Jesus said. And usually in the Gospel According to Spiritism, we also have each chapter is divided in 2 parts. The first part is usually Kardec takes a small piece of the Gospel, of one of the Gospels, of one of the letters of Paul, one of the letters of Peter. Sometimes he takes even passages from the Old Testament. And then Kardec himself makes a comment about that topic. Then, after he does that with one passage from the Bible, 2 passages, 3 passages, then he opens up a second part inside that chapter that's called the instructions of the spirits. Let me see how they translate it here. Instructions from the spirits. And then they put small messages that were received, psychographed around Kardec's time, and they talk about specific topics related to that chapter. So tonight, since we are starting the chapter, we are going to read one small passage from the Gospel, and then we're going to read what Kardec wrote about that specific passage. And the passage that I'm going to read was taken from the Gospel of John. which is in order in the Bible, is the fourth gospel, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it was taken from chapter 14, verses 1 to 3. So that's what Kardec took from the Bible and put here for us to think about. So he takes this. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that where I am, you may be also. So this is Jesus talking, and John wrote what Jesus told us. So he says, don't be afraid. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. You believe in God, so also believe in me. I am telling you, in my Father's house, there are a lot of places. There are a lot of other houses. There are a lot other mansions. If this was not so, I would have told you. So this is true. That's basically what he's saying. And then he goes on, right? We're going to go back a little bit to what he's saying after we start talking a little bit about what Kardec is saying. Kardec, though, when we think about house, when we think about a mansion, when we think about a dwelling, a shack, a tent, we think about something physical. Why wouldn't we think so, right? And these are words that bring the image of something physical, right? We even call a spirit center a house, right? Some people call churches and temples houses of worship. Why? Because it's something physical. And that's one of the things that we need to remember. And it is very interesting now that I'm saying this, I'm making the connection to what Emmanuel was saying before in the message about prayer. It just said house of prayer, right? So, house of prayer. Why? If we can pray anywhere, right? It is almost as if, because of what we grew up with, because of our culture, it is as if we believe, without even thinking about it, that prayers can only be done there, right? That we cannot do this outside. That as if it's not going to be as powerful as it is in that house of worship, in that house of prayer. As if the prayers, when we do it here at Continuum, or there at the temple, or there in Marlborough, at Chetu, or whatever Spirit Center can think about, as if it's going to be more, there will be more spirits to hear it. Oh no, they have this loudspeaker, they have the microphone. So you're doing the prayer there, and then God will listen to it more.
I think so.
Right?
I think so.
So maybe we should buy a microphone to our house then, right?
Yeah.
If it works here, right? Why wouldn't it work at our places? So, but coming back to our topic, when we think about houses, we think about physical places. But it is very interesting how Kardec's mind works, because he doesn't. Well, he will say it, but it is not the name of the topic. He says, and I'm gonna read the topic, which is more or less the topic of what we're going to talk about tonight. The title of the topic that Kardec gave to this, to start the chapter, was The Different States of the Soul in its Spiritual Wanderings. In this other version here, it says, the different states of the soul after discarnation, after we die. So Kardec does not start talking about planets inhabited. He doesn't start talking about, oh, there are spirits living in that planet, or in that other planet, or in another system, or this system is this, or the Earth is this. He is going to talk about it. But the topic that he puts here is the idea that we do not die. That's the first thing. And how different it is. How different this is, right? It's still so tough, even for us spiritists, and don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about other religions, I'm talking about ourselves here. How tough it is to talk about death, especially when somebody in our family is going through that. Of course it is tough. Of course it is tough. But if we don't learn how to deal with it, what are we doing then? Because as everybody in this planet knows, there's only one certainty in life, is that it's gonna end, or two.
What? You're gonna die.
Yeah.
Second one, you have to pay taxes.
Taxes, yeah, just like Benjamin Franklin said. And why, right? And then we get angry at death and at taxes. It's we have to do it. So, and if we have to learn to deal with taxes, we should better start learning how to deal with death as well, right? So Kardec, his mind works in a completely different way. He says, look, we are going to die, right? Jesus died, and he said that he will be there waiting for us. And that's part of his message. So we are going to die too. So why don't we prepare to die? And then what Kardec is going to say is, look, Jesus told us there are many houses, there are many mansions, there are many dwellings. And what are these dwellings? And that's what he's going to talk about. What are these? The house of the Father is the universe. That's how he starts. So because Jesus said, in my Father's house. So he starts, the house of the Father is the universe. What is the universe? It is so amazing that these days, if we were to tell Kardec at that time what we know about the universe today and what he knew about the universe back then, he would have said, I was right and I didn't know. I didn't even imagine. I mean, he could have imagined, but physics these days say that we are only able to see 5% of the matter of the universe, because 95% is what they call dark matter that we are not able to detect. What? 5%? And we see trillions and trillions of stars, and around each of those stars there are planets going around. And these numbers, they only keep growing, because every time you check, every 5 or 10 years, will come a scientist and will say, oh, those numbers, they are wrong. We found many more. And when is it going to stop? We don't know. So, but let's keep going with what Kardec said to see if he really imagined this or not. The different mentions that Jesus says are the worlds that circulate in infinite space and offer the spirits who incarnate on them dwelling places corresponding to their progress. So Kardec starts talking the very first paragraph, and he just finished the first paragraph, so it's 2 sentences, very brief. He says, okay, the Father's house, our Father's house, is the universe. And these different mentions are the planets circling around the universe. So he starts saying, okay, let's just take this out of the picture, because this is, everybody can think about this. Everybody already talks about this, and maybe some people who believe that there are life in other planets, they are already talking about, because we are able to see the planets, we are able to see bodies in space, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to talk about something different. So let's swipe this below the carpet, and maybe we can take it out later. He says, apart from the diversity of the different worlds, the words of Jesus also refer to the fortunate, to the lucky ones, to the people, or wretched states, or the states of being depressed, being distressed, being destroyed. The lucky, the good ones, these good states, or the bad states of the soul in the spirit world. So now he opens up and he says, well, I already said, and I agree with this, maybe I'll talk about it later, but now I already said that we have planets, that there are spirits living there, other people, whatever, if you want to believe it or not, but that's what part of what Jesus said. But apart from that, what I want you to understand is that the words that Jesus are using also refer to the states of our souls. If I am happy, or if I am sad, if I am a good person, or if I am a bad person, we are in different places. We are in different dwellings in the spirit world. He goes on, conforming to whether the soul is more or less pure, is more purified or less purified, and detached from material ties, and getting far away from materiality, from the ties that embrace us from matter. And now I remember that book, and I cite it when I'm talking about this all the time, because that image stuck with me. When I first time I read the book, I heard that they were translating, I'm not sure if it's done or not, to English. It's called Volte. It's called I Came Back. I don't know what would be what will be, or it is the translation, if it already has. Also psychographed by Chico Xavier, but this time written by the spirit called Brother Jacob. He says he dies, right? He discarnates, and he is there at his own funeral, at his house, right? So the body is there, and he is there looking around, and he starts to hear people talking about stuff, but he feels something weird. He says that I started feeling that my things, as if they were calling me. So I don't remember exactly what it was. I remember that when I read that, I remember my feeling. So I'm going to say as if it were me. I'm learning to detach, and I'm learning because of this book. It's taken me a long time, but I'm learning. I remember thinking that if I were in his place, and if I were seeing my body and seeing people, and I were in my house, I would feel my CDs calling me. My CDs would be like almost right, spinning there in the songs, and I couldn't touch the CDs anymore. That's how I felt when I read the book, when I read that passage. So what Kardec is saying here is that once depending on how much we have we are still connected to our materiality, to the things that we think are ours, to our clothes, to our house, to things, to my CDs, to whatever. So he will say, he'll go on. conforming to whether the soul is more or less purified and detached from material ties, the ambient in which it finds itself will vary infinitely in the aspects of things, in the sensations it feels, and in the perceptions it has. Just like the situation I just described. If it were a spirit that were not connected, not attached anymore to those objects in his house, brother Jacob, he could be there and not feel anything. He would be happy, maybe. He would be, oh, look at me. I was so beautiful. Or whatever. But now he was thinking of, oh, I want this. And you can't have it anymore because it's already gone. It's there. And what do you have inside of you? And that's what Kardec is saying. Depending on our relation with the things and with the people, with ourselves inside, is what will dictate where and how I'm going to be, which state, not Massachusetts, Rhode Island, right? Not these states, physical states, but the state of harmony, the state of disharmony, right? The state of joy or the state of sorrow. These states, these emotional states, depending on how I am inside, how connected I am to the good thoughts, to the good deeds, to the best feelings and sentiments, or to the sentiments or feelings that bring me down, like depression, like anger, like hate, like selfishness, like pride. So depending on these states, I will find myself maybe in the same position or in the same place, physical place, right? So I can be here, but depending on who I am and how I am, I can see things or not see things. I can feel things or not feel things. You show one of the most famous paintings of all time, there in the Louvre, like this big. When we see, right, imagine that, oh, if I ever saw the Mona Lisa, right? Yeah. And then you come to that room. I've never been there, just saying because I heard and read it so many times. And then people say, you get into that room, there are 1,000 people, right? You look from far away, it's so famous. Apparently in our heads it's big, right? And then you get there, you get disappointed. But it's not about that. It's that one of the reasons why they say that Mona Lisa is so famous is because it has that look, that smile, those eyes, that you don't know exactly what is going on through her mind. And people say that depending on how you are, you look at her and you will see her smiling or being sad or asking you questions. What? Mona Lisa doesn't ask any questions, right? Mona Lisa has the smile is always the same. It doesn't change anything. So why does it change? It changes because I change. It changes because my states see different things depending on how I am. So some people, if you are very patient, if you are on those days where the world can fall apart, where everything or anything can happen, and you say, oh, that's okay, God is beautiful, right? Love is the best thing in the world. And a person comes and says something really bad at you and say, oh, my brother, you can go in peace, right? Well, there are those days. For us, it's still rare, right? It's very rare. So, and if that same person comes and tells me the same thing on another day where I'm not feeling good, where I'm not well, how am I going to respond? So it's the same thing. It's the same word sometimes. It's said basically the same way. But because of the way that I am at that specific moment in time, I can feel something completely different. And that's what Kardec is talking about here. He's saying, look, we die, we will die, Once we wake up, where will we be? We will be here. If I die here, I'm going to be here. I'm going to maybe detach from my body instantly, or I'm going to be connected to it for a while. But then all of a sudden, I'm not going to be transported instantaneously to a different place. I'm going to be here, physically speaking. But then let's say 3 people died at the same accident. Not necessarily those 3 will see each other when they die. Why? Because they may be in completely different aspects. Their mind work differently. And the way, the things they see, one can be completely scared. And they will not be able to, once somebody tries to speak to him or to her, they will start screaming, and then they will run, or they will, right? And we have movies that show some ideas about this. Chico Xavier, for example, said once that when he watched that movie Ghost, he said that, oh, look, how Hollywood knows this. How do they know this? Because this is how it happens. And some people just don't see other spirits. And some people see the other spirits. Even they're dead, but they're not seeing each other. Let's keep going with Kardec here. While, and he's going to talk about part of what we're discussing here right now. While some cannot leave the ambient, the environment where they live, some cannot leave the house where they live. They will be stuck there. And then we will talk about haunted houses, poltergeists, and people who, I see the person who lived there in no big news. Depending on how tied I am to that thing, I'm going to get stuck with that. And I'm going to be there. Because I don't want to get rid of it. And I don't like anybody touching that thing. This is my house. This is my shirt. This is my necklace. This is my diamond. And then nobody can touch it. And I'm going to be. While some cannot leave the ambient, the environment where they live, others raise themselves and travel to other worlds and all over space. That depends on how able and how I am able to detach myself and to be able to think differently about who I am right now and what are my priorities. While some guilty spirits wander in darkness, there are others who have earned happiness, and these rejoice in a state of shining brightness while they contemplate the sublime spectacle of the great infinity. While some prefer the darkness, those of us who are still killing, who are still hating more than loving, who are still going further down and down by stealing, by instilling hate, by saying bad things about everybody, by separating instead of joining people, right? These will be together in a place where they share the same mind, the same ideas, and usually a darker place, because selfishness only brings me separation, only brings me to those who are also selfish. A person who is not selfish, maybe because he is not selfish or she is not selfish, he will try to help those who are selfish. But it will come to a point where if the selfish person only wants for itself or for himself or for herself, the other person will say, hey, look, I'm going to try to help other people who really want to do something, because, you can do whatever you want. So be happy. It's your choice. I'm not against what you're doing, but I prefer to help people who really want to be helped and want to help in return, and not only give, and not give it back to the community, whatever it is. So Kardec is saying, if we are going that path, that's fine. It's our choice. We have the ability, the capability, and the permission from God to do whatever we please. But he's saying, look, there are consequences to it. And here I'm explaining you part of the consequences. Maybe not on earth, physically speaking, but after we die, we are going to places that are not eternal. You're not going to stay there forever, but you will not feel very good about it for a while. Then, which is one of the things that are amazing about Kardec and about the organization of this book, is that he's talking about this, he's talking about life in other planets or life after death, right? And saying that you're going to be there in a state of unhappiness, of suffering, of problems because you did not do well while you were living here. Next chapter is reincarnation. So that you can come back and do it again. That's how the book is organized. On the other hand, people who are giving, who embrace others, who are living happily with what they're doing and are doing good to the community, are doing good to themselves, are striving and making a big effort to improve themselves. Once we discarnate, we will be able to see more clear. We will be able to see that the world is much more than what we even thought. And we will be able to enjoy the world in a different way, not suffer the world in a different way. Because both we will go on. The ones who are doing the wrong things, hopefully not us, but some of us, right? And the ones who are doing the good things, we will go on. These will probably suffer a little bit more because they are choosing so. And these will not suffer, they will enjoy. And that's what Kardec is pointing out to us. Finally, while inferior spirits are tormented by remorse and grief, frequently isolated without consolation, separated from those who were the object of their affections, and punished by the iron gauntlet of moral suffering. That's what we were just talking about. He's comparing now both sides of the story. He says, inferior spirits, who are those? Us. But of course, that there are inferior spirits, more inferior spirits, right? I hope, right, that we are in this inferior spirits, not here or here or here or here. And if we are, let's hope that we are striving to come to this and then to this and then to this and then to this. That's what we wish. That's what we hope for. So we know that we are making sometimes here and there a choice that was not very wise, that I said those things to that person that I shouldn't have said, that I didn't do this, that I should have done, and I should have, would have, could have, right? I could have done this, I should have done this, I would have done this, if, and it would give excuses and excuses and excuses. Once we wake up, once we have the conscience of, oh, look, I need to do something different, that's already the first step, which is really good. And that's why we keep saying, don't like the Spiritist teachings, go to the Catholic Church, go to Buddhism, go to the temple that your father grew up in. It doesn't matter where. So why? So that at least there we are listening to good things or listening to good messages, so that we don't keep going down and down and down and down and down. So that at least we reach a level and at least stay there, striving to go little by little to the next level, and so on and so forth. So Kardec makes the comparison by saying that The inferior spirits are usually tormented by remorse and grief. By remorse because, oh, I did this, I shouldn't have done that. And then I'm remorseful. And grief, oh, I'm suffering because I did this, or I'm suffering because this is so painful for me to do it. This is so hard for me to do it. And I have all that burden inside of me. And because of that, I isolate myself. Oh, I'm not deserving of your help. And then we keep going down, and I start to isolate myself. So when I die, what's going to happen? It's a consequence of what I'm feeling. It's the natural consequence. It's the natural sequence of what I am doing here. On the other hand, he says, to finalize it here, the just spirit, the spirit who is just, who is fair, together with those he loves or she loves, enjoys the delights of an undescribable happiness. Because if we are loving, and the other person is loving, and the other person is loving, what better sentiment can we have than this? And once we discard it, we will find those who really are loving. And the more love we have, the more love we will feel. The same way, the more hate we have together, the more suffering we will have together. So it is just a consequence, a continuation of what we're doing. Also, and he finalizes by saying this, also in that sense, there are many mentions. Depending on how I am feeling, we can be here full of spirits, which we certainly are. There are lots of discarnated spirits here. And some of these discarnated spirits are not seeing other discarnated spirits that are also here. Because we are in different mentions. We are in different dimensions. We are in different levels. And some of us are not going to be able to notice, to perceive, to feel the presence of the other ones because we are in different levels. Also, in that sense, there are many mentions. So he says, look, I know Jesus, many mentions, the universe, the planets, here and there. And then he goes, talks about feelings and talks about sentiments and said, so can you see now that Jesus is not just talking about physicality? He's not just talking about planets and so. If you are a good person, if you strive to do best, you will be together with people who do the same thing. Not because God wants you to, not because God will put you into this specific place. No. Because a person who likes to drink a lot will not try to find friends in persons who don't drink and don't like drinking. It's not because God wants me to go only to the people who drink. No, it's me. I drink, so if I want to drink, where should I go? To a place that do not offer drinks? To a place where people hate people who drink? No, I'm going to a place where people like to drink. If I am a person who likes to kill, who am I going to join? I'm going to join good people, right? That, oh, they're going to be trying to tell me that you should not kill, you should not kill. No, of course not. I'm not going to be there unless if I want to kill them. But then it will make me worse even more, right? So I'm going to be joined by those people who have the same types of feelings, the same types of sentiments. If I am loving, I'm going to look for people that are loving. And among those people who love, maybe if I like music, from that group of people who love, I will find that group of people who like music. Or if I like painting, to the group of people who like painting. Or the ones who like philosophy, I'll go to those who like philosophy. But I'm going to be on this side, or on this side, or on this side, and these can be at the same place, separated by my mind, separated by what I can feel and what I can see around me. So that we can finalize, I talked about after we discarnate, right? But I'm going to give an example of incarnation, a person who is here or who was here, and he lived in a different dimension. And of course, by being a spiritist, I could not cite anybody else or any other than Chico Xavier, right? And we all know a lot of his stories. But there's this story about this mention that he went once. And his father looked at him and said, look, tonight is the night. You are going to lose your virginity. You are going to I'm going to put you in that house where there are lots of women, and one of them will take care of you. Puts him there, leaves. And when his father comes back, he is there talking to all of them about the gospel of Jesus and teaching them what is to love. He was incarnated at the time. He was a physical man. He was a person who was there. Meat and bones. I'd say that more bones than meat, right? He was very thin, right? More bones than meat or flesh. But instead of seeing that place as a place of perdition, as a place of sin, he transformed that place into a place where the gospel, where the good news of Jesus could be taught. What changed? The place was still the same. The same. No, not a chair, not a wall, not a color was changed. What was changed was inside. Was one single person that was able to change that place into a different place, even if for 2 hours or 3 hours. But it changed because he wanted to do it. There are many mentions in our Father houses, independently where we are. We can transform our house in a house of discord, in a house of hate, the same way that we can transform our house in a house of prayer, in a house of love. It depends on us. It is up to us to follow Jesus' steps, Jesus' teaching for lives in a good mention instead of in a bad mention. I hope that we can all strive and work to do that with our lives and with the lives of all, especially the lives of our loved ones. Thank you for your patience. Yes. And now, I'm not sure if you guys want to give passes or not. No. So I'm going to just wrap it up in a few minutes, say the final prayer so that we can all go home in peace.
We would like to
Do the prayer.
the water.
Yeah.